Okay, it's Friday night, time for Refugee. Let's run down the checklist, make sure everything's ready. The background swamp bayou is active, our studio is up. Monitors 1 and 2 are standing by and ready. All cameras are aimed, they are in focus. They are ready. We'll be ready for Refugee in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy Memorial Day weekend. If Memorial Day can be thought of as happy, it is actually the most solemn of our national holidays, and many people are going to be out. I realize that if you are watching this live, well, thank you for taking your time on Memorial, or maybe you just don't have a life, but like me and Refugee and those that are in the chat room with us. It is Friday night, and we have Refugee in our green room. He is standing by. We're going to have a little bit of an abbreviated show tonight for reasons that we'll get into in just a moment. But in preparation for Refugee, I am going to, I fired our Magic Genie. I'm going to try to do this on my very own, and let me see if I can just reach up and kind of pull the monitors down like that. There we go. I think we got it. And Refugee is standing by. And he's had an interesting day. I'll let him explain it. And let me bring him in. Make yourself comfortable. Refugee from the great Bayou State of Louisiana. Tell us about your day, man.
How are you, Mark?
How
are you, my friend?
For the benefit of the audience, Refugee and I spent some time on the phone, which we collaborate quite a bit. And one of the frustrations is, as a grassroots project, we don't have paid professionals that are contractually obligated to do things, and it's kind of hard to get people to do something. And Roger, of course, was right on board saying, you're right, we got to find ways to get people motivated and activated and all that. And Roger calls me a few minutes ago and says, well,
I'm just not prepared tonight, Mark. I prepared nothing. I waited until Friday to prepare a show, and then I got up early this morning, got kept out all day with one emergency after another.
But you were actually on a noble mission, though, if I remember. You told me.
I was, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, because I'm going to bring some spirituality into the show this week. I think that's always important to do during Memorial Day weekend, and also just anytime maybe we haven't been living up to things the way we want to. But Mark, I got a strange topic on my mind, and I want to talk to you about it, and I want to vent a little bit, and I want to find out if things are similar or different in the great state of Florida as they are in the great state of Louisiana. And what I want to talk about is alligators. And because it's an area where the government stepped up and did a good job, but where now they have me irritated. The Louisiana government has me irritated. About 30 years ago, Mark, the wild Louisiana gator population had fallen down to about 80,000. And the state decided that that was just ridiculously too low, and that we did not have enough alligators in the state of Louisiana. And they massively shortened the hunting season. They massively increased the fines for killing a gator if it's not hunting season. And you better be able to prove that that gator was a threat to your life. You can't just shoot them and say, oh, it was a threat to my life. You better have some evidence.
How about your dog?
Some fine.
Your dog's in the water, the gator's approaching. How does Louisiana handle that?
You're allowed to. You're allowed to, but it's literally kind of like whenever you shoot a person, there's a lot of investigation and there's a lot of hassle. When you shoot a gator, there's hassle and there's investigation. Well, they also severely reduced and made prohibitively expensive licenses to hunt gator. But you can hunt gator so long as someone with a license is leading the hunt. So what you have is you have this small number of people with licenses, and they lead the hunt, and they charge people during the very brief.
They just created an industry there. Yeah.
They created an industry there. And also with the alligator farming, and alligator farming is quite popular here, and they have to set a certain percentage of their gators free every year. Okay, so 30 years ago, we were down to about 80,000 gators. Mark, today we have 2.5 million wild alligators in the state of Louisiana. And the state has not changed or relaxed any of those rules. And I'm here to tell you that somewhere well short of the 2.5 million number is the appropriate number of gators that we should have.
Mm-hmm.
I was going for a walk with my brother the other day. Lives 5 miles outside of New Orleans in a very suburban area, right up against the Mississippi River. And we walked out over the levee because the Mississippi River's high right now and it's kind of flooded. So when you walk out over the levee, this area that's normally wooded is kind of swamp-like. And yeah, we walked right up on about a 14-foot gator. Talked to a friend the other day out fishing at Bayou Sinet, where I had never seen a gator before, telling me he cast off and there's 5 gators in the water. Know somebody who lost their dog to a gator about 2 months ago. Earlier this week, somebody calling me up about having a gator in their backyard. A kid last year going swimming in a public reservoir where nobody had ever seen a gator before, lost his arm to a gator. And 2.5 million gators in the wild is too many gators for the state of Louisiana, but somehow, and I haven't quite figured out if maybe it's the industry they've created, maybe it's the special interest and everything, but they're not backing off, okay? And okay, I'm willing to accept that 80,000 wasn't enough, but 2.5 million is too many. They're up and down the Mississippi River now, Mark, in the city of New Orleans. They're in drainage ditches. They're in drainage canals. They're in residential neighborhoods. There's too many. And it's an area where the government needs to step in and do the right thing, and they're not doing it. And I'm curious about what kind of gator situation you have in Florida.
Well, aside from the football team that uses the gator as its mascot, Florida is
Right.
not. Okay, well, first of all, let's talk about the government's role in managing wildlife. We all
Right.
know what a game warden is, but very
Mm-hmm.
few of us know why is it called a game warden. Some departments call them wildlife officers, but what is a game warden? Well, basically the law here in Florida takes the approach that fish and wildlife are wards of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the state has the burden and duty to manage the wildlife, which is a pretty broad scope. Now,
Right.
so therefore, they count, try to estimate the various populations and try to maintain a balance so that people can hunt and fish for recreation, which is part of our strong tourism industry. But at the same
Right.
time, we want to raise money through licensing fees. So we have an out-of-state license, which is egregious in its pricing.
Right.
So the state has to manage the wildlife, and then you get into taxation and those issues, out of state versus in state. But then you have the public safety involved, and the other problem, which I don't know if you wanted to go here or not, but the Constitution provides that we can't be subject to unreasonable search and seizure.
Right.
Game wardens have extremely broad and, in my opinion, unconstitutional
Excessive power.
authority, excessive powers, because you can be, you can just be randomly stopped. Now the typical scenario is you got a hunting truck, you're obviously hunting,
Mm-hmm.
and a game warden can just stop you to just check to see have you exceeded your wildlife. Well, there's no probable cause in that scenario.
Right.
None.
Right. Yeah, I have a
None.
problem with it too. But Mark, the state might have a bigger interest when populations fall really low. And for a state the size of Louisiana and for our culture and everything else, 80,000 probably was too low
Well,
for the
may,
number.
maybe you don't want to go there, but I'm going to wrap the point up and we'll leave it at that. So,
Okay.
since game wardens can basically stop and detain, not necessarily arrest, but can detain anybody. I have gone out riding on patrol with my father-in-law, who was a sheriff deputy, and we
Hmm.
had our suspicions, but we didn't have probable cause. What did we do?
Okay,
We called the game warden,
there you go.
who detained them. Once they're detained, we can search. They search the vehicle, and then of course we find what we kind of figured was there. But doesn't that constitute unreasonable search and seizure?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
And I think it does. And I think that things end up overstepping whatever their initial purpose was. I think there was an initial purpose of making sure that we protected the gator and preserved the hunting culture of gators and everything else. But we've lost sight of that, and now it's just some kind of ridiculous revenue making thing for the state. It's becoming a public safety.
It's a business. I'll
And
tell you. I'll tell you a story. Behind, in the background, you see a Lake Miccosukee, which is on the county
mhm,
line between my county and the county next door. It's basically a bayou. It's a swamp. It's about, on average, 80+% of that lake is chest deep.
mhm,
Well, one day I was duck hunting, and duck hunting is regulated by the federal government, by the way,
mhm,
migratory fowl. And I had too many ducks on the water. I had shot over my limit. Now, the game wardens,
mhm,
typically, when you go into the landing, they're there to check your guns for the various, rule compliance, and check your take to see if you've exceeded your bag limit. Well, the game warden had been on the shore not too far away, and he saw me drop all these ducks. So he
mhm,
blows his whistle and he's waving his arms and telling me to come ashore. You know,
mhm.
and so I just motioned him, if you want to come out here, you come out here. I'm not turning. Well, so I kind of ignored it. Well, a few minutes later, I noticed that he is now wading out toward my duck blind.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh crap. And he literally wades out and says, I need to see your hunting license. And I said, you mean you don't know who I am? He said, no. I said, well, obviously you don't. And it sounds to me like you don't know who my father is either. Because if you did, you wouldn't be asking. And he was getting a little irritated. He says, I don't know who your father is. I don't care who your father is. And I don't know who you are. I'm telling you, under force of law, to show me your hunting license. So I cranked up my motor and left. I
Okay.
wanted to make sure he didn't know who I was. I don't do that kind of
That's
thing
fun.
anymore. But
Yeah, it's no, that's fun. And Mark, we were talking earlier too about my day started off today. Now I know you're a Baptist, I'm a Catholic.
mm,
Okay, and one of the things we do as Catholics, we go to confession. And when we go to confession, it is customary that the priest will give us some sort of a penance, usually that's supposed to teach us a lesson, aid in our spiritual growth, and so on and so forth. And my priest, when I went to confession this week, he asked me, he said, "Well, how are you recovering from your surgery?" I said, "Oh, I'm fine." He said, "Oh, good, good, good." He said, "You're able to walk the dogs?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I'm glad to hear that." And he said, "You're able to do a little housework and stuff like that?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, that's fantastic." He said, "Because your prayer life is so good right now. I'm not going to, and you've been reading scripture so well. I'm not going to give you a chapter of the Bible to read or any particular prayers to do for your penance. I cut down a whole bunch of trees on the side of the church, and I need you to come out here and start dragging a bunch of these limbs to the side of the road and bundling them up in sizes that the city will pick up." And so I gave him an hour this morning. And I got up at about 6 o'clock in the morning just because the heat has arrived. The heat has arrived in South Louisiana. And I did not want to be out there in 90-degree and 90% humidity conditions.
yeah.
So I went out there at about 6 o'clock in the morning and did it. But we had an interesting conversation during my confession this week too. And it's funny because you and I were talking about guilt and shame earlier, and we were talking about when you're trying to get somebody to do something, guilting them or shaming them is not a way to do it.
If they're a volunteer.
Uh,
Yeah.
yes, if they're a volunteer, guilting them or shaming them, they're just going to go away,
Right.
you know, and
Exactly.
stop coming. But my priest pointed out to me that I have too big of a tendency to guilt and shame myself,
Hmm.
particularly before sin,
Hmm.
but and during the temptation stage of things. And then he made a point, first of all, of talking about the difference of guilt and shame. He said, now, first of all, I am not one of these psychologists that says that guilt is bad. I think guilt is incredibly good. I think that when we do something wrong, you know, and we have a guilty conscience, that is positive. It speaks to our character. I think that's also a way that the Holy Spirit communicates with us sometimes to let us know that we've done wrong. But he reminded me that shame isn't about, you know, feeling bad because we've done something wrong. It's about thinking that we're a piece of crap.
Hmm.
And that's when Satan, who will initially be the great tempter, will then become the great
Right.
accuser
Accuser. Hmm.
and start telling you this is so horrible, you can't be forgiven, you
Right.
can't possibly live this lifestyle that you want to live. And you can go into this shame that instead of is I am, you know, I've done bad, it's I am bad, I'm
Hmm.
garbage.
Hmm.
Well, God doesn't make garbage. And but he counseled me that not only do I take myself to a shame place sometimes, but he says, Roger, you have a tendency to do it just when you're under demonic attack. And he said, the fact of the matter is, you've been growing in holiness and growing in your prayer life the last year. And as a result, you are undergoing more demonic attack because Satan does not like the way that you're living. And he said, I'm not talking about when you lust after a woman in your heart. He said, when you lust after a woman in your heart, you've taken it from the eyes to the heart.
Hmm.
You've played with it for a few minutes.
Yeah.
But he said, you seem to be under some impression that you're not going to come under great temptation sometimes. And he said, I want to remind you that Christ in his human nature was tempted. And he brought up to me the passage of the Apostle Paul when he talked about having the thorn in his flesh and asking God 3 times to remove it, and God, basically Christ saying, "No, my grace is sufficient." And he said, Roger, you haven't just asked Christ 3 times to remove this thorn from your flesh. You've asked him about 30,000 times. And he said, you just maybe need to get to a point where you accept that this is a part of the cross
Yeah.
and that you're always going to be tempted in certain areas and stop beating yourself up because he says, I see you do it. He says, you beat yourself up when you're tempted, and then it actually makes you more likely to go out and commit the sin. Whereas what you should say is, thank you, Jesus, for allowing me to be tempted, because Jesus doesn't tempt, but he can stop Satan from tempting. He can stop it. And when he allows it, it's because he knows you're strong enough to handle it, and it's because he's decided to give you enough grace to overcome. And that we can actually thank God for our temptations.
Well, I
And
did an interesting study because I was approached one time in a small group Bible study, and they said why I wasn't even the teacher in this scenario. I was there, and they said, why does the Lord's Prayer include the phrase "and lead us not into temptation"? Would God actually lead us into temptation? That seems contradictory, and I was flat-footed. I was caught off guard. I said, honestly, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question, but I assure you that the Bible does not contradict itself. There must be something
mm-hmm.
missing, and I'll get back with you next week. And I did some research on it and found out that the use of the word temptation in our modern day linguistics is evil solicitation. And that is certainly
Uh-huh.
an accurate interpretation, but it has not always been thus.
Mm-hmm.
It has always included that, but the word temptation or tempt is also interpreted as a means of testing something. So to put it in perspective, we'll use this illustration. This tool, this knife, has been tested to
Mm-hmm.
not break under a certain psi, pounds per square inch, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
The word that was used in old times when that was written it would say tempted to,
Mm-hmm.
in other words, that was a measurement of to measure its strength to give you confidence in using the tool
Mm-hmm.
for its fitness for a particular purpose. Now, if you look at it in that way, okay, the scripture is no longer contradictory. It is still a little bit mysterious. But
Mm-hmm.
you can be sure that there is harmony in the scripture. You can be sure that
Yeah.
there is no contradiction in the scripture, because if so, that would invalidate the very nature of God. It's all a
Mm-hmm.
fraud. If there's anything inconsistent or in error or inaccurate or incomplete. I was having a discussion today with a youth minister.
Mm-hmm.
I had two discussions today with ministers, and we do this from time to time. And the subject matter of miracles came up, or actually we were talking about evolution, and I said God is the author of natural physical law, correct? Yes. I
Mm-hmm.
said if that is true, it brings into question the notion of miracles, because a atheist or a secular naturalist would say there are no miracles. There's just things we haven't explained yet, and I'll go along with it up to a certain point. If you and I took a Bic lighter into the Amazon forest and found a tribe, and we flicked that Bic lighter, those
Mm-hmm.
people might well perceive of us as gods.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I said, okay, but here's my take on miracles. I believe in miracles because they are recorded in the Bible as such. But let's use my classic example here is the parting of the Red Sea. I said,
Mm-hmm.
if God is the author of natural and physical law, then this is problematic that the Israelites were backed up against the ocean by the pursuing Egyptian army.
Mm-hmm.
Did God say, "Oh man, I didn't think of this. I'm going to have to violate my own natural law and part the sea so that to provide them with an escape"? Now, by the way, since God is sovereign, he actually has the right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if he did that, in my opinion, my conclusion would be, well, you didn't contemplate all this. You knew it was going to happen. Uh, so, was it a miracle? I say absolutely it was a miracle, but I say this: the Red Sea would have parted anyway. The miracle is it parted just at the right time and allowed
Mm-hmm.
them to
Mm-hmm.
escape. And then, as the Egyptian army pursued them, whoop, that's the miracle,
Mm-hmm.
folks.
That's a very interesting way. It's a very interesting way of looking at it. It truly, truly is. And Mark, when I look at everything going on in the country right now, and I think about the miracles that we need and the prayer that we need in order to fix things. The simple things that pop up every day now, the stories in the news that at one time would have been unthinkable. Whatever, the sex offender, child molester that was a part of trans story time at the library. Well, you wouldn't have had trans story time at the library, certainly not in the state of Texas, you know, you know which is where this happened. And but we see it every single day.
Well, for
Just
clarity,
how
for
far.
for the
What's
audience,
that?
in case the audience is unaware of the circumstances there, let me kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
There's this thing now where transgenders now read books to children in public libraries, and of course these books are basically normalizing transgenderism and drag queens and this type of thing, and of course as Christians we object to this kind of thing. It's indoctrination. It's using story time to indoctrinate children. Well, it turns
Mm-hmm.
out that the drag queen that was chosen turned out to be a sex predator, convicted
Mm-hmm.
sex offender.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the library profusely apologized that they didn't do their due diligence. Okay, well, as you pointed out, this takes the spotlight off of why is this even happening to begin with. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
to
Um,
we've, but here's my question: Okay, library, you didn't do your due diligence, but somebody or some organization put that person forward. What about their due diligence?
Right, right. No, they didn't care.
Yeah, I
And
don't
I
know.
read an article.
Yeah, if you give them the benefit of the
I,
doubt,
I
they
wish I
didn't
wish I
know
had it.
either.
I wish I had it in front of me because I'd like to quote it real specifically, and I'm going to have to generalize a little bit because I don't have it in front of me. But I was reading an article today about sex education that has just been passed and approved in the state of, I believe it's in the state of Minnesota, and it's for third graders. And Mark, there's pictures, there's
Mm-hmm.
drawings,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and they actually have a drawing. Now, the drawing is of a man and a woman having sex, but then it says sex can include the
Mm-hmm.
penis being inserted into the vagina
Mm-hmm.
or the mouth or the anus of the man or the woman that you're having sex with. And this has been approved for use with third graders
Well,
in public
it's
schools.
in that whole topic is inappropriate for prepubescent.
Mhm.
Okay, they don't even.
Yes.
It's not even on their radar. They're not equipped
No.
to handle that. Now, once they get 12, 13ish, I think it's time. But the schools have no place in teaching anything other than biology. Okay, we need to
No, but
know.
Mark, we brought up something during our education and spirituality shows that I think is important to remind people of. Whereas I agree with you that there's no place in discussing that until the kid is 12 or 13 years old at all. You have to now. Now, I don't think it should be done in schools, but you have to at home because unfortunately, pornography and misinformation
Mhm.
about sex is now ubiquitous,
Yeah,
and
it's
our kids are
pervasive.
now getting they're getting hit with it at very young ages. And
You're
so
right.
the
So we
fact of
have
the
to.
matter
Yeah,
is, if we wait till 12 or 13,
yeah. They've
they've
already
already
been.
been taught all
Yeah,
the wrong information.
yeah. But I find it interesting as a sociologist. Here's what bothers me the most. The most threatening thing that I can think of is a truth that was taught to me: norms change through deviance.
Yes.
That is an axiom in social studies. Okay, what today? Okay, we see men with earrings. We think
Mm-hmm.
nothing of it. Well, we may have an
Mm-hmm.
opinion about it, but turn the clock back. That was feminine. That was queer. That was it was rejected. So if you understand and I hate to say accept, but if you accept it as an axiom that norms change through deviance, we're on a slippery slope here because everything that we've talked about with regard to indoctrinating children in sexuality is normalizing what has been traditionally, even from a secular point of view, deviant behavior. And
Correct.
God, and regardless of the social norm, God has something to say about sexuality. He makes it very clear.
Mm-hmm.
So we're losing this battle, and even all we can do is push back. But it seems to me we're past that Rubicon point that this is going to be a part of our culture, and the best we can do is counter program. What do you think?
It's the best we can do is counter program. It's the best we can do is counter program, and we got to start it early, and we got to talk to kids about their sacred parts, and it's not their dirty parts, and but talk to them about what God intended. And kids who grew up on farms, in the old days, learned
Right.
about sex a lot earlier too.
Mm-hmm.
And because they were just watching the animals, on the farm do it. And we've got to deal with it with our kids. Now, Mark, we're going to close. I'm going to try to be better prepared next week. I can't promise the topic next week because a lot of it's going to depend on whether certain things become available that don't look like they're going to become available. And you know what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
things we'd like to do. And if we can't do it, we'll have a different topic. But since we're on this story of norms changing over time and sex, I just want to close with what I consider to be a funny little story from my past. I was working at actually for a cancer research laboratory. And most of the time, I was actually working with white rats. But we owned some rhesus monkeys that we kept at the primate center in the state of Louisiana, Covington, that we currently weren't doing anything with it. And Bristol Myers hired us to do some research on these rhesus monkeys. This is
Okay.
the pre-Viagra days,
Let me
and
let me interject. I know this story. I do want you to share the story. I want you to dial it way back, please. We are on YouTube. Okay. And so tell the story, get the point, but well, the less detail, the better.
Let's you're mad at me for telling the story. Well, it was okay, Mark. Literally, it was my job was to go in and inject the monkeys with this drug, and then record how long it took for them to respond to the drug.
Mm-hmm.
Because this drug was going to supposedly work differently, and more aggressively than
And
Viagra
it
worked.
was, yeah, it was basically a sexual stimulant.
And it was going to turn them on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I'm supposed to inject all the monkeys and then write it. Well, I only did it 3 times. And the reason I only did it 3 times is because the first time I went in, and it seemed to take an average of 10 to 15 minutes per monkey.
Mm-hmm.
The second time I went in, and it took an average of about 3 times per monkey. The third time I walked in, those monkeys took one look at me and started masturbating.
Mm-hmm.
I had become a rhesus monkey sex symbol.
Right.
But the point I'm making, odd thing to have happened to you in life.
Well,
But
the experiment was flawed because they saw. Yeah, because in any experiment, what your goal is to isolate all the variables. Okay, get a baseline,
right.
Change one and only one variable, and measure the
should have
result.
Been a different person each week. Sometimes they should have been getting injected with saline. Yeah, all kinds of things.
Right, you have controls and placebos. So this experiment was doomed from the beginning. But the PG rated version of it is they saw you, the sexual refugee,
yes, they did.
as the object of their sexual stimulation rather than the
it was the weirdest feeling. Okay, and but you can manipulate biology through drugs and through chemicals and everything like that, and that's what we were doing. But Mark, I'm going to close it this week with that fine story. And so we talked some gators, we talked some rhesus monkeys, and we talked a little bit forgiveness and guilt, shame. And next week we'll probably turn to more of a political topic in nature.
Here we go. I'll keep you on screen because I want to share with the listeners. For those of you that have been following along, we are in contact with Diamond and Silk, and they have not said no. They have asked for clarification. We were hoping to have a special show May the 31st, a week from tonight. But I also have been in contact with Troy Towns, and he is circling up a group of conservative leadership in Alabama. We don't know if Diamond and Silk will appear. I'm kind of thinking the chances are remote at this point. But even if they don't, we are going to be talking along the idea that the stranglehold that the Democratic Party has had on the black vote is unwarranted. It's and we're going to make an effort.
Dan.
Yeah. I've also got some random thoughts, and we're actually going to make a push here. And what form that's going to take, I don't know, but I can tell you that a lot of work and time is being invested in how can we develop a strategy to win a significant portion of the black vote for Republicans.
What I love about this, Mark, is that this is both political and spiritual. Because on the political front, what you're looking at is, the Democrats have abandoned the white vote. They've abandoned the traditional vote. They're going harder and harder left, and they're just assuming they can't lose the black vote. You back them off from 90% of the black vote to 60% of it, they can't win any elections.
Right. Their whole house of cards will collapse.
And the political side.
And we are actually making
spiritual side. that mark the damage that the New Deal and the damage that the far left Democratic Party have done to the black family is satanic. They went after the black family, and they have largely destroyed the black family. And there are problems in the black community that exist because they've taken fathers out of homes, they've destroyed marriage, they destroyed the pre-existing black middle class. There's a lot of things that they did. They targeted black communities for abortion. Now they're getting wise to the fact that we know it. They're starting to try to protect themselves against that language. The pro-aborts are realizing that we're talking about the way so they're starting to admit that most abortions, or that a much higher percentage of abortions that are had by, are had by black women. Something like 40% of the abortions now, I think, are had by black women, even though they represent only about 12% of the blacks represent only about 12% of the population. But of course, they're saying that no, it's the whites, it's the pro-lifers that are racist, because the poor black women are the ones that depend on this health care so much,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to deprive them
Mm-hmm.
of that health care. Yeah, there was almost no divorce in the black community. There was very little outside of wedlock marriage in the black community. It's way up in the 80s now. Fathers aren't in the homes. The black man is being emasculated, and there's a spiritual value to doing this as well. So it's a spiritual fight to help our black brothers and sisters, and it's a political fight to help the conservative cause and to help win elections.
Well, here's the I've been doing quite a bit of research and introspection. There has emerged some very strong thought leadership in the black community. Candace Owens is clearly
Yes.
a popular figure. Diamond and Silk, popular figure.
Yeah, and she coined the Blexit term that I like so
Right.
much. Yeah.
And I've done some research on the hashtag, and we're gearing up for a push. Okay. Now, what we're pushing against is a very anemic version of social media that exists today compared to days in the past. I hate to call them glory days because I think our best days are still ahead. But it's going to take a significant amount of effort. But I can tell you that we are circling the wagons. Our own Casper Stockham has
Mhm.
offered to come to the state of Alabama. We're trying to organize not only a show for here, but my concern is that while these thought leaders have emerged and are speaking boldly and correctly on the topic, I'm not seeing how that is translating into what I call moving the needle. And this is what I met with a former pastor about for 2 hours today, as well as another current youth pastor. And I'm trying to get my head around what is PJNet? What are we going to do? Because if we are going to do
Right.
it, I don't think it's going to be accomplished through aggrandizement and national presence of a central figure, whether it be me, you, Stockham, or Troy Towns, or whoever. But it's going to have to be a
It's going to happen. It's going to
grassroots.
have to start happening inside their own churches, where pastors, I think, more than national figures. National figures are great, but I think if we can get the ear of black pastors,
Okay, let
and
me let me share. You just made me think of a profound statement that I heard because let me go way back to the Newt Gingrich presidential campaign.
Mhm.
Newt Gingrich had was asked the question in a nationally televised debate, and he had basically made the statement that that people need to be janitors at the schools. In other words, get a job, get off the public dole, get
right,
off this dependent. He is normally extremely well versed and very thoughtful, but he really blew it, in my opinion. And I'm leading up to 2 points. Okay, the question was posed in the debate like this. You recently were speaking at a black church and said that they need to get a job as janitors at the school. How degrading was the implication, you know?
mhm.
And Newt, I forget the answer he gave. I know what he should have said. If that would have been me, if I would have had my composure, I would have said, "What kind of church did you say I was at? A black church? I was at a Christian church." that happens to be predominantly black. This guy,
Mhm.
this former pastor that I had lunch with today and met,
I also would have asked, and why are you attacking janitors as not
yeah,
doing honorable work?
honorable work, yeah, but the and earlier you made the reference, black churches. Well, I heard a very profound statement today. In spite of all the progress that we aspire and have made, 11 o'clock Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in the United States.
It is.
That
It is.
really just hit me right there. Uh, we've made such progress, but yet it's still, y'all do we're still in many ways very. It's not physically segregated anymore, but it's psychologically segregated. They have their churches, we have ours, and
Some of it is because, oh, I don't know if I'll upset people with this, but okay. In my opinion, uh, all right, let me just say it. In my opinion, we have put too much emphasis on praise and worship and not enough emphasis on learning how to be good Christians. Praise and worship is great, but when you put too much emphasis on it, it tends to be about, well, what type of music do you like?
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
what type of social scene do you like?
mm-hmm.
Okay. And they're going to have a certain type of different music at the black church than they have at the white church, and this and that and the other. Well, it needs to be. I'm not saying that praise and worship isn't great. It is, but it's not just about feeling good and clapping your hands. Okay, it's about listening to the message, and we have the same message. Okay, we have the same message. There's differences from this church to that church, but basically we have the same Christian message. Okay, so yeah, yeah. I think we do need to work toward desegregating our churches, and I think that, but I think we have to admit where we are,
Mm-hmm.
and we are where we are, and I think we have to have, start winning over more black pastors to our side who live within the black community. Because look, they don't have any reason to trust me. They don't have any reason to trust you. They might not be paying any
Well,
attention to
I
any
can say the
national
same
propaganda.
words, and
Right.
it would have less effect. Let me just kind of pull the curtain back and try to share with you some of the thought that's going into this. Okay, first of all, we want to have events that are. One option is to have them in the churches. Okay, I'm lobbying against that. Let's have them at a neutral site, so to speak. Okay, I'll just say
Mm-hmm.
civic center. I don't. I'm not under any delusion that we can fill up a civic center, but nonetheless, at least at this stage, I hope to. But okay, so now there's a lot of expense, a lot of time, money, effort, and resources get poured into this. And one of the frustrations I'm having is people talk about they want change, but when it comes time to sacrifice, they've always got a great excuse. This is part of the battle that we're facing. And by
Mm-hmm.
the way, hats off to our loyal people. Hazards, I'm talking to you for hanging in there even when there may not seem to be a reason to right now. Okay, we've got to expand that core group, but it's going to take a lot of work. But here's my point: is okay. So you dump all this time and money, you rent the facility, the equipment that surrounds me you can't see is purchased with the purpose of projecting it outward to go set up
Mm-hmm.
and do these events. The amplifiers, the speakers, the sound system, the video, all this technology. That's what I bring to
Correct.
the table, and I consider it an honor and a gift from God that I can do this. All right, but now you do this, now nobody shows up. All right, so one of the ways, taking a page out of the Democrat playbook, they bust people in.
Yes, they do.
They do. Now, I'm not saying that we don't, but they make it's a priority. They put their money where their mouth is, and they're going to get people there. Okay, now, one of the problems you've heard me complain about is that churches are a
Mm-hmm.
501c3, and whether they're sincere or not, they hold that out saying, whoa, 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 we can't do politics here in our church.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Pastor, your church has a van. Now, we can't afford buses. But those churches have vans. they can certainly, the pastor can say, hey, we're taking a group of people, we got some people, we're going to, it's part of the discipleship program of the church. I mean, they go to Busch Gardens.
Right.
Okay. So I'm thinking, what if we
Right.
had a bunch of vans showing up? We could literally get, a lot of people, quote, bust in that way. And the church can do this safely, saying, the church didn't sponsor that. We just, one of our groups took a bus, no different than a trip to Busch Gardens or Disney or whatever. It's just a social thing. So that's part of the thought process. Now, I was actually hoping to have a leadership, to have a brainstorming session with some of the leaders, but that was to be tomorrow. I was going to drive to Montgomery, Alabama to meet with them and share some vision and see where they're at and how much commitment they're willing to make. It turns out that it is Memorial Day weekend, and of course, and now I'm being told that even the 31st is not a good day, so it's getting pushed further and further. It's very frustrating, but I am committed to this path because I think one of the conceptual frameworks is the time right? Is now a good time? Okay, well, if you look at that, and I know we're going long here, but I'm just sharing with the group because I need everybody on board. I need people thinking about this and bringing ideas to the table. If you say, is the time right? If it's not right, it would either then be too early or it would be too late. Now, let's talk about too early. You don't want to go off too early. You don't want to fire your shots before the target is within range. It's a waste of ordnance. I don't think it's too early. All right, so let's turn our attention to, is it too late? Because the analogy that in my mind is a building that's on fire and you have a fire hose. If you arrive too late, there's no point. You can't. The fire is progressing faster than you can suppress it. So no amount of effort is going to stop that fire from completely engulfing and destroying that building. I will entertain argument to the effect, is it too late? Because you could say there's just too much done. We can't, it's too late. We're down the toilet. I don't think it's too late. Because if I really did, I wouldn't really invest and commit myself to the cause. But I am concerned that if we delay much longer, it will be too late. I think the time is very good. Since the 60s, the Great Society, we've dumped enormous amounts of money. Anytime the federal government comes up with a war on and then fill in the blank, I can pretty much predict that it's going to fail.
Yeah.
Okay. For all, and so they've bought into it. What is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting a different result. Basically, I think we can capitalize on the idea that, I get it that they tried to raise you up out of, but they have not delivered. What they have done is put you in permanent, not necessarily poverty, but you cannot possibly expect to excel in a dependent relationship on the government.
Right.
You will never reach your potential that God has put in everybody. Let's start looking to be less dependent and more independent, and let's raise up some champions in every group, regardless of your color. This is basic, just motivational speaking. You can do better than you're doing.
I will tell you one person I'm going to reach out to locally and try to get to be a part of this team. There's a pastor near here. He's an Assembly of God pastor. And I believe within that system, he's a presbyter. And I think that his church is mostly where other pastors come to church. Like other pastors come and he preaches to the other pastors. Okay. But he's a black gentleman. And I noticed that he had a Ben Carson bumper sticker on his van during the primaries, and I noticed during the general election he had a Donald Trump bumper sticker on his van, and I may bring him in and see what some of his insights are into this. because clearly he has left the Democratic plantation. Clearly, he has. But Mark, we are going long. We've kind of been wrapping it up for a long time, and I'm dead tired,
I hear you.
man.
Well, I kept you on screen, and maybe I could have dismissed you, but these are some of the
No, it's
thoughts
good.
that we're working on.
Yeah, no, it's good. I liked listening to it, and
Um,
it's good to catch the listeners up kind of with where we're going and what we're thinking about doing from one week to the next, and what we're trying to organize and everything like that. 'Cause this is all important stuff.
all right, I'll well, Roger, thank or refugee, thanks for being here tonight. Get some rest. I know you've done some work today, and and we'll be back Friday night, and we'll figure out what's happening between now and then, my man.
All righty, God bless you, Mark.
All right. He can still hear me. I just wanted to kind of give him a little break. And here's the trump card. Here's where we're going, or here's the thought. In the state of Alabama, there has never been in the state House of Representatives or state Senate. There has never been a black elected representative. So we are thinking that that is a reachable rung. And I've met with, I've talked to Troy Towns. He is circling up the leadership. I've talked to Casper Stockham. Refugee says he has another resource. But basically, that's going to be our test. That's going to be the incubator, the test tube. Can we reach that goal? Can we break that glass ceiling in a state like Alabama? And of course, we'll make a lot of mistakes and we'll learn from them. But if we can do that in Alabama, then we can certainly do it in Mississippi, Georgia, and some other states. And maybe we'll actually move the needle. And I applaud. Please don't misunderstand what I may have said. What I said earlier. I applaud Candace Owens and I applaud Diamond and Silk for what they're doing. But I'm looking at doing something more grassroots, something that is, more grassroots, and we have to be able to measure, how is this making a difference? And I certainly agree with what Candace is doing and Diamond and Silk and others are doing, but I'm having difficulty measuring how is that translating into social change? How is that How is that translating into public policy? And things like that. So that's kind of where my head's at, and I hope if you're on board with that, I'm reaching out to you saying I need, we, not I, we, if we're going to do this, it's going to be very, very difficult. The landscape in Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, folks, the game is rigged. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a conspiracy fact. I have the facts. I have the figures. But we will have to use it, but we're going to have to take it to the streets and start a movement there. And we will use these social media platforms to advertise what we're doing and to recruit others to join with us, because remember, dogs do not chase parked cars. So folks, hang in there, get ready, because we're fixing to launch, and it will be difficult and we will need a lot of help. So if you have anything to offer, I'm reaching out to you to please hit me up, and I'm all ears, and I'd love to hear from you because we got a job to do. Let's get to work.